The early morning silence on Highland Avenue was shattered by a single gunshot on May 8, 2021. Security footage, later released by Albany Police Department, captured the final moments of 24-year-old Serenity Hollis's life. The grainy video shows a figure approaching from behind, raising an arm, and firing a single shot to the back of her head. No words exchanged. No confrontation. Just a calculated execution, carried out with cold precision. In the moments before the attack, Serenity walked alone through the pre-dawn darkness, unaware of the figure stalking her movements. The killer's approach was deliberate, their intent unmistakable. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a random act of violence. The methodical nature of the shooting suggested something far more targeted. A planned assassination that would add another name to an already devastating list of transgender lives lost to violence. Albany, Georgia, a majority black city of 73,000 residents nestled in the southwestern corner of the state, woke to news of the homicide that morning. Located along the banks of the Flint River, this community with its historic downtown and southern charm became the backdrop for a tragedy that would soon capture national attention. Police responded to reports of a body discovered on Highland Avenue in the early hours. By the time first responders arrived, Serenity Hollis was already gone. Her body lay where she had fallen, another victim in a city that has struggled with violent crime. For the local officers who secured the scene, this marked the beginning of an investigation that would reveal layers of complexity and prejudice. The community's reaction was mixed, shock from many, but also uncomfortable silence from others, highlighting the complicated relationship between conservative Southern communities and their LGBTQ+ residents. As we uncover this story together, I want you to ask yourself, what would drive someone to commit such a targeted act of violence? Was this a hate crime born from prejudice, an act of revenge, or something else entirely? Your thoughts matter, so stay with me through this disturbing journey. Serenity's death wasn't an isolated incident, but part of an alarming pattern. By early May 2021, she became the 25th known transgender or gender-diverse person killed that year in America. Even more disturbing, she was the third transgender woman murdered in Georgia alone in just 5 months. The statistics tell a devastating story. Black transgender women face disproportionate levels of violence, with their life expectancy in the Americas estimated at just 35 years. The Human Rights Campaign has documented record-breaking violence against transgender individuals year after year, with 2021 on pace to surpass the previous year's grim toll. Most victims share common factors. They are predominantly women of color, under 30 years old, and killed by acquaintances or strangers in circumstances that often go unsolved. Behind each statistic is a human being, someone like Serenity Hollis, whose life was cut tragically short by hatred, fear, or indifference. Born and raised in Albany, Georgia, Serenity Hollis navigated a complex journey of self-discovery and authenticity. Though official records and police reports would later dead-name her, using the name she was given at birth rather than her chosen name, those who truly knew her recognized Serenity as the woman she had always been. She grew up in a city known for its deep Southern roots, where tradition and conservative values often clashed with evolving understandings of gender and identity. By 24, Serenity had established herself within Albany's small but tight-knit LGBTQ+ community. Friends described her transition as a gradual process of becoming more authentically herself, despite the challenges that came with being visibly transgender in a conservative Southern community. She found moments of joy and acceptance in spaces that welcomed her true self, though these safe havens were limited in a city like Albany. Serenity's daily life involved navigating the ordinary and extraordinary challenges faced by young adults, finding employment, building relationships, and creating community, all while managing the additional burdens of discrimination and misunderstanding. She frequented local establishments like the House of Jazz Nightclub, seeking connection and normalcy in a world that often denied her both. In the aftermath of Serenity's murder, her mother Robin Osbury and sisters Shannon and Sarah emerged as powerful voices demanding justice. Their public statements revealed a family that, despite the complexities that often accompany having a transgender loved one, stood firmly behind Serenity and honored her identity. The person that's responsible has no idea what they took from us," Robin told local media, her voice breaking with emotion. This mother's grief transcended any differences, focusing instead on the profound loss of her child. Shannon Osbury spoke candidly about her belief that Serenity was targeted specifically because of her transgender identity, noting that a lot of people took offense to her sister's existence. Sarah Osbury provided crucial context about previous violence against Serenity, revealing that this wasn't the first time her sister had been attacked. Their willingness to speak publicly demonstrated a family bond that remained unbroken, even in death. Serenity's existence at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities, Black, transgender, and female, placed her in one of society's most vulnerable positions. In Georgia, a state without explicit protections for transgender individuals in employment, housing, or public accommodations, Serenity faced legal barriers to full participation in society. Economic opportunities were limited, with transgender people of color experiencing unemployment rates up to 4 times the national average. Healthcare access presented another obstacle, particularly for transition-related care in a state that has repeatedly attempted to restrict such services. Even using public restrooms could become a fraught experience under Georgia's conservative political climate. The constant threat of violence shadowed her daily life. As Sarah Osbury revealed, Serenity had previously been stabbed multiple times outside a local nightclub approximately 2.5 years before her murder. Each day required navigating a world where her very identity could provoke hostility or violence. Those who knew Serenity described a young woman with a vibrant personality and infectious laugh. Despite facing discrimination, she maintained a resilient spirit and determination to live authentically. Friends recall her generosity, always ready to offer support to others in the LGBTQ+ community who were struggling. Serenity harbored dreams typical of many 20-somethings, finding love, building a career where she could be accepted, and someday living in a larger city with a more established transgender community. She hoped to save enough money to complete her medical transition and legally change her name and gender markers, dreams that dissolved in an instant on Highland Avenue that May morning. The final hours of Serenity Hollis's life began on Friday, May 7, 2021. According to witness accounts pieced together by investigators, Serenity spent the evening with friends at a local gathering. The night progressed without incident, giving no indication of the tragedy that would unfold in the early morning hours. Around midnight, Serenity reportedly left the gathering, telling friends she was heading home. What happened during the next few hours remains largely unknown, a critical gap in the timeline that investigators have struggled to fill. Did she meet someone? Was she followed? These questions continue to haunt both investigators and loved ones. By approximately 4:30 in the morning on Saturday, May 8th, security cameras captured Serenity walking alone on Highland Avenue. The footage shows no signs that she felt threatened or was aware of being followed. Her pace was unhurried, her demeanor calm. Minutes later, at approximately 4:45, emergency services received the first call, reporting gunshots in the area. By 5:15, police had secured the scene. Serenity was pronounced dead at the location, having suffered a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. By daybreak, news of the homicide had begun to spread through Albany's communities. Highland Avenue cuts through a residential area of Albany, characterized by modest single-family homes interspersed with small businesses. In the pre-dawn hours when Serenity was killed, the street would have been nearly deserted, streetlights casting pools of yellow light on empty sidewalks, houses dark with sleeping residents. The area has struggled with crime in recent years, though violent incidents of this nature were uncommon. Just blocks away from more trafficked streets, this section of Highland Avenue offers limited surveillance and few witnesses, an opportune location for someone planning violence. The surrounding neighborhood is predominantly working class, with a mix of longtime residents and rental properties, creating a landscape where strangers might not immediately draw attention. The surveillance footage released by Albany Police Department on their Facebook page provides a haunting glimpse of Serenity's final moments. The low-quality, grainy video shows her walking alone, unaware of the figure approaching from behind. The timestamp indicates it was approximately 4:40 in the morning, a time when few witnesses would be present. The footage reveals several critical details. The perpetrator appears to have been waiting or following at a distance, suggesting premeditation rather than a chance encounter. The attacker's movements are purposeful and direct, indicating familiarity with the area and possibly with Serenity's routine. Most tellingly, there is no attempted robbery or interaction. The shooter approaches, fires a single shot, and immediately flees the scene. Law enforcement analysts noted the killer's efficiency and apparent comfort with firearms. The video, while crucial evidence, frustratingly fails to provide a clear image of the shooter's face or distinguishing features, complicating identification efforts and leaving investigators with limited leads. The manner of Serenity's murder, a single shot to the back of the head, bears the hallmarks of an execution rather than a crime of passion or opportunity. This method of killing suggests several disturbing possibilities about the perpetrator's mindset and motives. First, the execution style indicates a killer who wanted to ensure fatality with minimal chance of survival. There was no hesitation, no confrontation, just cold, calculated violence. Second, shooting from behind demonstrates the attacker's cowardice and unwillingness to face their victim. Third, this approach minimized the killer's risk of being identified by Serenity or leaving evidence through physical contact. Criminal psychology experts consulted on similar cases note that such methodical violence often indicates deep-seated hatred or a desire to eliminate someone perceived as a threat to the killer's identity or status. The precision suggests someone comfortable with violence, possibly with prior criminal experience, who specifically targeted Serenity for who she was rather than what she possessed. If you're finding this story as disturbing as I am, please take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm particularly interested in your perspective on whether this tragedy could have been prevented. Was there a systemic failure that left Serenity vulnerable? Should the previous stabbing incident have been investigated more thoroughly? Your engagement helps these important stories reach more people and sparks crucial conversations about protecting vulnerable community members. As we continue exploring Serenity's story, your thoughts and reactions help build awareness that could potentially save lives in the future. Approximately 2.5 years before her murder, in late 2018, Serenity Hollis faced another violent attack that foreshadowed the danger she lived with as a transgender woman. According to her sister Sarah Osberry's statements to local news station WFXL, Serenity was stabbed multiple times outside the House of Jazz, a popular nightclub in Albany that attracted a diverse clientele. The attack reportedly occurred after Serenity had spent the evening socializing with friends. As she exited the venue, an assailant, whose identity remains unclear in public records, confronted her in the parking lot. What began as verbal harassment quickly escalated to physical violence when the attacker produced a knife and stabbed Serenity multiple times. Witnesses described a chaotic scene as other patrons exited the nightclub to find Serenity bleeding on the pavement. Several bystanders intervened, likely preventing the attack from becoming fatal. Emergency services were called, and Serenity was rushed to Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital with multiple stab wounds to her torso and defensive wounds on her arms, indicating she had attempted to protect herself during the frenzied attack. Serenity's survival of the nightclub stabbing was attributed to a combination of quick medical response and her own resilience. Emergency medical technicians stabilized her at the scene before transporting her to Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital, where she underwent emergency surgery to repair damage to her internal organs and stop internal bleeding. Her recovery spanned several weeks, including time in intensive care, followed by a lengthy physical rehabilitation process. Friends reported that despite the trauma, Serenity maintained remarkable strength throughout her recovery. The attack left both physical and emotional scars. Serenity became more cautious in public spaces and reportedly expressed concerns about her safety to close friends, a premonition that would tragically prove justified. The connection between the nightclub stabbing and Serenity's murder remains one of the most compelling aspects of this case. While investigators have not publicly confirmed a direct link, several patterns suggest these attacks may not have been isolated incidents. Both assaults targeted Serenity specifically, rather than occurring during robberies or general violence. Both attacks were exceptionally violent and appeared motivated by hatred rather than material gain. Shannon Osberry's statement that her sister was killed because a lot of people took offense to her existence as a transgender woman points to a consistent motive of transphobic violence. Investigators have explored whether both attacks could have been perpetrated by the same individual or group, or whether the first attacker may have influenced others to target Serenity. The geographic proximity of both incidents within Albany's relatively small community raises questions about whether Serenity was being systematically targeted by individuals who knew her movements and routines over an extended period. The law enforcement response to the nightclub stabbing raises troubling questions about how seriously crimes against transgender individuals are investigated. According to community advocates who spoke on condition of anonymity, the initial police report categorized the incident as a bar fight rather than a targeted attack, despite witness statements suggesting otherwise. The investigation apparently stalled within weeks, with no suspects publicly identified or charged. Records indicate minimal follow-up with witnesses, and Serenity herself reportedly felt dismissed by investigators who seemed skeptical of her account. The case was effectively shelved as inactive within months. This pattern of inadequate response to violence against transgender individuals is unfortunately common nationwide. Studies by the National Center for Transgender Equality show that over half of transgender victims of violence report unsatisfactory interactions with law enforcement. Had the first attack been thoroughly investigated, connections might have been established that could potentially have prevented Serenity's murder years later. From the outset, the investigation into Serenity's murder was compromised by institutional bias evident in official documentation. The Albany Police Department consistently dead-named and misgendered Serenity in their reports and public communications, including their Facebook post sharing the surveillance footage. They referred to her exclusively by her birth name and used male pronouns throughout their documentation, effectively erasing her identity in death. This wasn't merely a matter of paperwork. It represented a fundamental misunderstanding of who Serenity was and the context of her life. By failing to acknowledge her as a transgender woman, investigators potentially overlooked crucial aspects of motive and missed connections within the transgender community who might have provided valuable information. The practice continued even after family members and community advocates contacted the department to correct the record. This institutional resistance to recognizing Serenity's identity reflected deeper issues within law enforcement's approach to transgender victims and highlighted the additional barriers to justice they face. The misidentification of transgender victims creates cascading failures throughout the investigative process. A 2018 ProPublica investigation found that in 87% of cases involving transgender murder victims, police departments identified the deceased by their discarded legal names rather than their lived identities. This practice hampers investigations in multiple ways. Witnesses who knew the victim only by their chosen name may not recognize or come forward with information when dead names are used in public appeals. Community members who might have crucial knowledge about threats or conflicts related to the victim's transgender identity often distrust law enforcement due to these practices. Additionally, misgendering can lead investigators to overlook hate-based motives, instead pursuing irrelevant leads. The statistical tracking of crimes against transgender individuals becomes impossible when victims aren't properly identified, creating a dangerous cycle where violence is both undercounted and inadequately addressed. For Serenity, this misidentification meant that potential witnesses from Albany's LGBTQ+ community may never have connected news reports with the woman they knew. As of this report, Serenity's murder remains unsolved. The Albany Police Department has made no public announcements regarding suspects or persons of interest since releasing the surveillance footage in May 2021. Detectives assigned to the case have interviewed family members and known associates, but appear to have developed few substantial leads. Community sources indicate that investigators have collected additional surveillance footage from businesses along Highland Avenue and have canvassed the neighborhood multiple times. A reward for information leading to an arrest was established, but has generated limited response. The case remains technically active, though resources dedicated to it have reportedly diminished as weeks turn to months without breakthrough developments. In a significant development that diverged from the police department's approach, Dougherty County District Attorney Greg Edwards publicly stated that he believed Serenity's murder constituted a hate crime. Speaking to local news source WELB, Edwards acknowledged the likelihood that Serenity was targeted specifically because of her identity as a transgender woman. This classification represented an important recognition of the case's true nature and opened additional investigative avenues. Edwards' statement also carried symbolic weight for Albany's LGBTQ+ community, who saw it as validation of concerns they had raised for years about targeted violence. The district attorney's office pledged to pursue enhanced penalties under Georgia's hate crime statute if and when a suspect is apprehended and charged. Georgia's hate crime legislation, passed in June 2020 after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, represents a double-edged sword for cases like Serenity's. The law allows for enhanced penalties for crimes motivated by bias against race, gender, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, or physical disability, but notably does not explicitly include gender identity as a protected category. This legislative gap creates uncertainty about whether attacks specifically targeting transgender individuals qualify for hate crime enhancements. Prosecutors must instead argue that such crimes fall under gender or sexual orientation provisions, an interpretation that remains legally untested in Georgia courts. Beyond criminal proceedings, Georgia offers no explicit protections for transgender individuals in employment, housing, or public accommodations. This broader legal vulnerability creates an environment where discrimination flourishes unchecked, potentially emboldening those who would commit violence. For victims like Serenity, this means the very system tasked with delivering justice may not fully recognize or address the true nature of crimes committed against them. The year 2021 marked a devastating milestone in America's ongoing epidemic of anti-transgender violence. By December, at least 57 transgender or gender nonconforming people had been killed, the highest number recorded since tracking began. This represented a 42% increase from the previous record set just 1 year earlier. These statistics, compiled by the Human Rights Campaign, likely undercount the true toll, as many victims are misgendered in death or their murders go unreported as hate crimes. The pattern revealed a disturbing acceleration of violence, with each month bringing new names and grieving communities. The pandemic appeared to exacerbate existing vulnerabilities, as economic instability pushed many transgender individuals into precarious living situations. Meanwhile, a record number of anti-transgender bills in state legislatures across the country created a climate of heightened hostility and dehumanization. Serenity's murder in May occurred during what advocates described as the deadliest period for transgender Americans in history. In the same month Serenity was killed, several other transgender lives were violently cut short across America. Kerry Washington, a 29-year-old black transgender woman, was found murdered in her Clearwater, Florida apartment on May 1st. Just 2 days later, Jahaira D'Alto, a 42-year-old transgender activist and ballroom community leader, was stabbed to death in Boston while trying to protect another woman from domestic violence. Whispering Wind Bear Spirit, a 28-year-old indigenous non-binary person, was fatally shot on May 4 during a home invasion in York, Pennsylvania. Their death highlighted the often overlooked violence against indigenous two-spirit and non-binary individuals. Sophie Vasquez, a 36-year-old Latina transgender woman, was shot multiple times on May 4 in her Georgia home, just days before Serenity's murder in the same state. Danica Danny Henson, a 31-year-old black transgender woman, described by friends as the embodiment of love, was shot and killed in Baltimore on May 4. Family members believe she was murdered by someone she knew, possibly a romantic partner, underscoring how intimate relationships can become deadly for transgender women. Each victim represented a unique life with dreams, relationships, and contributions to their communities, all extinguished in a single month that exemplified the crisis of violence. The disproportionate violence against transgender women of color stems from intersecting systems of oppression that create compounding vulnerabilities. Employment discrimination pushes many into economic instability. The unemployment rate for black transgender people is 4 times the national average, with 1 in 3 living in poverty. This economic marginalization often leads to housing insecurity and reliance on survival economies that expose them to additional violence. Healthcare barriers present another institutional failure. Many transgender individuals lack access to affirming care, with discrimination in medical settings reported by 50% of Black transgender patients. This leads to untreated physical and mental health conditions and creates barriers to gender-affirming care that would allow many to live more safely in their authentic identities. The criminal justice system frequently criminalizes rather than protects transgender women of color. Police profiling, incarceration in facilities that don't match their gender identity, and skepticism when they report crimes create a dangerous cycle where victims avoid seeking help from authorities. Media coverage that sensationalizes or misgenders victims further dehumanizes transgender people in the public consciousness. These institutional failures create a perfect storm where violence is both more likely to occur and less likely to be properly addressed, a reality that defined Serenity's life and ultimately contributed to her death. In the aftermath of Serenity's murder, her family has become her most powerful advocates. "I absolutely want to see that justice is served," declared Robin Osberry, Serenity's mother, her voice steady despite her grief. The family has maintained regular contact with investigators, pressing for updates and ensuring Serenity's case isn't forgotten among the many unsolved homicides in Albany. They've organized community vigils on the anniversaries of her death, creating spaces where Serenity is remembered by her true name and identity. These gatherings serve dual purposes, keeping public attention on the unsolved case while celebrating the authentic life Serenity lived. The Osberry family has also connected with advocacy organizations like the National Black Justice Coalition to amplify their calls for justice. "We won't stop until whoever did this is held accountable," Shannon Osberry told supporters at a recent remembrance event. "Serenity deserves justice, and we won't let the system forget her." Preventing Serenity's murder would have required interventions at multiple levels. The earlier stabbing incident should have triggered comprehensive investigation and protection measures, including taking seriously Serenity's concerns about being targeted. Law enforcement agencies need specific training on transgender issues and hate crimes to properly identify and respond to escalating threats. Legislative protections explicitly covering gender identity in Georgia's hate crime and non-discrimination laws could create both practical safeguards and cultural signals that violence against transgender people will be taken seriously. Healthcare systems that provide accessible, affirming care would allow transgender individuals to access necessary treatments without economic barriers that push many into vulnerable situations. Community-based violence prevention programs, specifically addressing anti-transgender bias, have shown promise in other regions. Educational initiatives in schools and public institutions could address the root causes of transphobia before they manifest as violence. Most fundamentally, media coverage that humanizes rather than sensationalizes transgender lives could shift public perception and reduce the dehumanization that enables violence. Supporting transgender people begins with simple actions: using correct names and pronouns, speaking up against transphobic comments, and educating yourself through resources created by transgender authors and organizations. Consider donating to or volunteering with groups like the Transgender Law Center or local LGBTQ+ community centers that provide direct services. Contact your representatives about legislation affecting transgender rights, particularly protections against discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations. If you're an employer or manager, implement inclusive policies and training. Most importantly, listen to transgender people about their experiences and needs rather than assuming what would help. Small actions of respect and inclusion can create safer communities for everyone. This story sent shivers down my spine, and I hope it's moved you too. Serenity Hollis was more than a statistic. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend whose life mattered and whose death deserves attention. Her story represents countless others whose names we may never know, whose lives were cut short simply for living authentically. If you want to see more coverage of these important but often overlooked cases, please subscribe to Explosive True Crime Stories and share this video with others who should hear these stories. Your likes and comments help our algorithm reach more viewers, and the conversations you start could change minds and hearts. Remember that behind every case we cover is a real person with hopes, dreams, and people who love them. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people and could ultimately help save lives. Together, we can ensure that Serenity Hollis and others like her are remembered, and that their deaths weren't in vain.